Alright, as we continue through our discussions on Great Britain, what we're going to focus on today are Great Britain's political institutions. Alright, so the first thing that we have to look at here is the idea of linkage institutions. And remember that when we look at the definition of what a linkage institution is the middleman that exists between the government and the people. And there are three main linkage institutions that we talked about. We talked about political parties, we talked about interest groups, and we talked about the media. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at political parties that exist within Great Britain. Alright, originally parties were just caucuses, or meetings of people with a like mind. So when we talk about caucuses, it's people with similar backgrounds, similar goals, similar ideas, that want to see things get done within the government. The two most major parties in today's government are the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party can also be known as the Tories. A major third party is the Liberal Democrats, and they're formerly known as the Whigs. The majority party dominates Parliament and has the ability to pass legislation as they desire. The majority party is always going to get their way, and if they don't get their way, new elections have to be held within the government in order to be able to establish a new government. Currently, there is no majority within Parliament, and this can be known as a hung Parliament. So it's when you can't get a majority, it's a hung Parliament, and then generally you have to go into new elections. If you don't have to go into new elections, then what happens is you have formed a coalition. And that means that two parties have joined together in order to be able to form that majority needed in order to be able to form a government. Currently, the coalition that exists is the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats. So the Labour Party. The Labour Party most recently had control of Parliament between 1997 and 2010. The party began as an allegiance of trade union and socialist groups and worked for the expansion of workers' rights. Originally, the Labour Party pushed extremely socialist points of view through Clause 4. Clause 4 asked for the nationalization of the commanding heights of British industry. So when we look at that, that is in that post-World War II era that we talked about prior. Alright, so when it moves into that super socialistic, super government-controlled portion of British history in the 20th century, the Labour Party is the party that's in charge of that. So we've talked about that quite a bit in the last couple of lessons here. Alright, Neil Kinnock, who took control of the party in the early 1980s, shifted the party to a more moderate political stance, which has continued. And then when we saw that, we talked a little bit before about Tony Blair. We talked a little bit more about Gordon Brown, and those individuals being the main leaders between 1997 and 2010, and them looking for a much more middle ground between what we saw with Thatcher and then what we saw under what was happening under Clause 4. After the electoral loss in 1992, Kinnock stepped down and John Smith took over as party leader. This was short-lived as he suddenly died in 1994 and was replaced by Tony Blair. Blair continued the moderation of the Labour Party, but as party's victory margin shrunk, he resigned party leadership in 2005. And remember that one of the main reasons why his popularity dwindled throughout that time was because of his support of George W. Bush and the Iraq War. Gordon Brown took over as party leader, but after a poor showing in 2010 election, where Labour took only 23% of the vote, he resigned. Currently, Ed Miliband is the leader of the party. And we also have the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party dominated British politics from World War II to 1997. Under Thatcher, the Conservative Party pushed for a market economy, large-scale privatization, and fewer social welfare programs. And remember that we call that Thatcherism. All right, that pushing away from socially controlled concepts of British government is that idea of Thatcherism. After Thatcher left office, John Major moved the party closer to the center, and that's something we talked about in our last lesson. The party is characterized by noblesse oblige, and its power is centered in London. Remember, the noblesse oblige is that idea that it is the responsibility of the upper class to take care of the lower class. And that's very much why the Conservative Party did some of the things that they did, but it's also why they have pushed more towards other programs in order to try and grow the entirety of the economy so that it benefits all. The leader of the party must submit to yearly elections in order to be retained as leader. So those are elections that exist within the party. In 1997, the party was weakened by factional arguments. The traditional wing, which are known as the One Nation Tories, wanted the country to be ruled by the elites who would rule in the best interests of everyone in the country. And they support Britain's membership in the EU because they think about the idea that they will be able to lead within that organization. The Thatcherite wing wants to roll back government controls and move to a full free market. The members of this wing are often referred to as Eurosceptics because they don't agree with the EU membership. So there's a lot of things that are going on, and there's a lot of controversy that exists within this party. David Cameron is the current party leader and has been Prime Minister since 2010. He is considered to be a one-nation Tory. The Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats are a merge of the Liberal and Social Democratic parties, and this merge took place in 1989. The Liberal Democrats are a victim of the plurality voting system. So remember when we talk about that plurality voting system, that you have to get the most amount of votes within that district to win. So even though their popular vote range continues to go up within the country, that it's pretty well competitive, they do tend to lose in most of the districts. So even if they lose by 2 or 3%, because it is a plurality system, because it's that first past the post system, they have very few members actually within Parliament, which weakens their ability to do things within the government. The Liberal Democrats have sought proportional representation because it would increase the amount of people that are within the Parliament from their party. Nick Clegg, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, is the current leader of the party and is trying to help the middle-of-the-road party to gain more support. In 2010, the Liberal Democrats won 23% of the popular vote, but still came in third in terms of representation. Smaller parties. So there are a variety of smaller parties that exist within Great Britain. These parties generally don't have all that much power. The other three parties that we've talked about to this point are the ones that really contain the majority of the power within the government. But it's important to understand what these parties are because it helps show us some of the differences that exist within the nation. So there's the parties, the Plaid Cymru, which is Wales. There's the Scottish National Party. There's Sinn Féin, which is the political arm of the IRA, and the Democratic Unionist Party, and these are Protestant clergymen. So you can kind of pull from that you know, you're going to have a party from Wales, they're going to be more nationalistic. You're going to have a party from the Scottish National Party, which is more nationalistic. Sinn Féin, so it's the political arm of the IRA, so it's going to be much more pushing for Irish rights and things like that. And then the Democratic Unionist Party, which is the Protestant clergymen, they're going to push for more religious concepts within the nation. Then we have British National Party. They formed in 1982, and they have never had representation in Parliament. They are overtly anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim. So, and that's one of the reasons why they haven't been able to really gain any traction within the country. Then we have the UK Independence Party, and this party focuses on trying to remove the UK from the European Union, and that's really their number one goal. Elections. So how do elections work within the country? National elections are held to determine who members of Parliament will be. There is no election to determine who the Prime Minister will be. To where in the United States we're very used to going into the voting booth to be able to vote for our congressmen and to be able to vote for our president separately. That is not how that works when we think about the UK. Prime Ministers are merely members of Parliament, and they are the leaders of the majority party. All right, that's how that works. Now you know who the leader of that majority party is before you go to vote, but you are not casting a vote for who you want to see be Prime Minister. You are voting for the party that you wish to see take control within the government. Elections are held every 5 years, but they can be called earlier by the Prime Minister. So at most, a Prime Minister's term is 5 years. But it can be called really any time within that. You could really go a couple of weeks with the government, and if there's a vote of no confidence, or if the Prime Minister decides to say to hold new elections, then new elections are going to be held. The Prime Minister generally calls elections when they feel that they have the best opportunity to win. So, if they've served for 3 years and they're riding high on a wave of popularity, they can call for new elections because they know that they're going to win. Most Prime Ministers don't wait until their popularity begins to fade to call a new election because they want to maximize the amount of time that they have in office. Elections in Britain are winner-take-all with no runoff elections. The districts are single member and are first past the post, meaning whoever gets the highest number of votes wins the race. Remember, and we've talked about this a number of times already, A first-past-the-post system in a single-member district does not mean that you have to get a majority of the votes. It is not a majority system. It is whoever gets the most votes win. The winner-take-all system exaggerates the size of the victory of the largest party and reduces the influence of minority parties. That is why, when we think about the Liberal Democrats, though, even though they get a pretty decent amount of votes when we look at it on a nationalistic concept, because they tend to lose elections in each district, they have very few people within Parliament. All right, elections of regional governments. In 1998, the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and it allowed Northern Ireland and a regional government in which all parties would be represented on a proportional basis. Scotland and Wales were later given these rights as well. So that means that each of these areas, they have their own parliament. It's still a unitary government, even though there has been some devolution where they have the right to look at some minor things within their own local governments. However, parliamentary law still supersedes all law that takes place in these regional bodies. All right, interest groups in the UK. Britain has well-established interest groups that demonstrate interest group pluralism. Remember, this means that a variety of groups are trying to influence the policy-making process without one being able to completely dominate the process. So when we talk about pluralists, there's lots of people trying to get their way, but no one group is able to dominate the entire thing. There recently has been some evidence of neo-corporatism, and this is when interest groups dominate the state in the process of developing policy. And how we see neo-corporatism take place is that we see people of the cabinet go out and talk to people within the government to be able to see how things should be done. And then those people largely take what these people within the bureaucracy are saying are policies that they would like to see, and then they try and fashion those things into law. Neo-corporatism, which we see in Great Britain, is going to be very different than the type of corporatism that we see in Russia or in China, where corporatism there is designed in order to strengthen the state and to strengthen the unity and to strengthen the idea that people will follow what the government says. When we look at the concept of neo-corporatism, the idea is to be able to talk to the people and see what they need and then be able to put that into place. Corporatism is asking for complete loyalty to the state. Neo-corporatism isn't necessarily asking for that. All right, the groups with the greatest influence are known as quangos, and these are policy advisory boards appointed by the government. These groups work with the government to develop public policy. We also have the Trade Unions Congress, which is another big interest group, and they represent a coalition of unions and has a great deal of influence on the government. The Confederation of Business Industries is also really big, and they have influence over the creation of policy as well. The media. One of the main things that we see when it comes to the media within the UK is the British Broadcasting Company. Despite competition from private companies, the government strictly regulates the media and prohibits the selling of advertisements to politicians, parties, or political causes. So they have a very different way of running for government within that country, in which you do not have the same type of money being spent to run in an election like you do in the United States. This is the logo for the Conservative Party. This is the Labour Party. This is the Liberal Democrats. And these are the politicians that we talked about today.